Hello, I am Chloe Figgett and I have been researching into the discrimination that women face in football and the changes that have occurred over the past 150 years. I already had a strong interest in feminism and the way women are viewed in society, but I didn't know much about the struggles female athletes have endured when it comes to sports. I used to play football as a young person and gained an interest in the men's game. As an avid supporter of England and Birmingham City, I was shocked to learn about the difficulties women have faced when playing professionally. I didn't recognise the inequalities for women and girls when I began playing football back in 2005. For me and for many of my peers was because of the lack of coverage the women's game had. We were channelled into watching the men's game as that was only available. Our role models were all male footballers and the female counterparts were unknown, whereas currently there is a strong narrative forming across media outlets about women's football after England women won the Euros during the summer. This has encouraged me to dive deeper into the history of women's football and the journey it has been on to get where we are today. England women succeeded in 2022 in winning their first European Championship, with a record attendance at Wembley and thousands of supporters celebrating that the women brought it home.
And heart and motivation as well.
But only very few realise the significance of this achievement. The women's game has had an uphill battle to get where it is today, and it still has a long way to go. For over 140 years women have been playing football, with the first ever recorded game being on the 9th of May 1881. The game was between Scotland and England. The players wore different coloured jerseys, belts, knickerbockers, stockings, and for their footwear, high-heeled boots. Alec Gordon, an entrepreneur and actor, realised the potential of the women's game after seeing the rise in the men's teams. He recruited women from dance and performing circles and hosted the game in Edinburgh. Newspaper articles described thousands of spectators going to observe the game and reviewed that the game itself was a failure, with half the audience leaving before half-time, but describes that shockingly some of the players understood the aim of the game. The Manchester Guardian reported,
"The score or so of young women who do not hesitate to gratify vulgar curiosity by taking part in what is termed a ladies' football match appeared last evening for the second time this week on the ground of the Cheetham Football Club, Tetlow Fold, Great Cheetham Street." The club, however, had nothing to do with the affair. The players, attired in a costume which is neither graceful nor very becoming, were driven to the ground in a wagonette. Play, if kicking the ball about the field can be so described, was commenced pretty punctually.
News of the game grew far and wide, even internationally, and articles began to appear that mocked the quality of the game and made it out to be a joke. A week later, Alec Gordon hosted a second game in Glasgow, attracted 5,000 predominantly male spectators and several media outlets. During the first half of the game, many male spectators began shouting derogatory comments and mocked the players until, just before half-time, hundreds of men stormed the pitch and began attacking the players. The players ran to their horse-drawn buses, being hurled with items ripped down in the stadium, and had to make a quick getaway. The Nottinghamshire Guardian said,
"The team of 4 grey horses pulling the omnibus was driven rapidly from the ground amid the jeers of the crowd, and the players escaped with, let us hope, nothing worse than a serious fright."
Over the next few months, these actions of male spectators were becoming a common occurrence, and in June 1881, the women's teams began to fade out. Victorian Britain saw men as intellectually, physically and emotionally superior. They were the workers, the breadwinners and the force that kept Britain functioning. Women were confined to their domestic duties, responsible for looking after their superiors. They were required to look and act a certain way. With corsets and steel hoop skirts, they were to make no fuss and expected to be quiet in the background. With this traditional chauvinistic expectation, in 1894, Miss Nettie J. Honeyball shocked the nation with her interview in the newspaper. She was pictured in the men's football uniform, which entailed a long-sleeve shirt, shorts and socks, and even shin guards. She discusses the British Ladies Football Club and explains,
I founded the association late last year with the fixed resolve of proving to the world that women are not the ornamental and useless creatures men have pictured.
Nettie Honeyball rose to local fame when she recruited aristocrat and suffragette Lady Florence Dixie as the British Ladies Football Club president and financier. Her influence was significant in recruiting other female players to join the club. As the British ladies were beginning to form into a full official side, this again was received with criticism. The best-selling illustrated weekly magazine, The Sketch, produced a mocking cartoon. In it, a huddle of high-class women in dresses surrounded a fainting referee, while a woman headed the ball is tackled rugby-style to the ground. Men leer over the good-looking goalkeeper, and women make the most of the half-time break to fan themselves and do each other's hair. The constant mocking of the women's potential only encouraged Nettie Honeyball and the British ladies more. They make it clear that this isn't just about the love of the game that encourages them to play. It was also the aim of the club to be broadly used as a tool to challenge the outdated views around women in society and further the emancipation of women. In 1895, the FA affiliated the British Ladies Football Club, and they played their first official match. This was between North and South London, held at the Maidenhead Football Stadium. 10,000 spectators attended the game, and the ladies continued to play together, touring the UK, but unfortunately a decline occurred once again due to the violence portrayed by male spectators. During the end of the Victorian era, women were beginning to step aside from their domesticated duties and reliance upon men. They were beginning to work in factories and coal mines as there were cheaper labour being paid less than the men. Women became unified together and were standing up for specific causes and realised they were vital to the British economy. The establishment were in disagreement, reporting that
problems that you see, drunkenness, homelessness and neglected children are because mothers are at work 16 hours a day. It is the working women's fault.
But this didn't stop women wanting to work and gain some independence. So just as modern women's football begins in the higher classes, working class women are being demonised. But the establishment had to put their criticism aside once the men were called out to war. The women were also needed on the home front to help keep the war machine alive. Women became the nation's hidden army as they took on every conceivable task to help the country win the war. There was no occupation not undertaken by women. The women who were once viewed as weak were now lifting heavy machinery, performing manual labour and managing hundreds of colleagues to ensure production continued. Some trade unions were sceptical of employing a female workforce, fearing how this would impact the men's workforce upon arriving home. Evidence of this is shown in a photograph in the National Records of Scotland, which displays two women testing condenser tubes at John Brown's & Co in Clyde. Behind them on the chalkboard a message reads, "When the boys come back, we're not going to keep you any longer, ladies." Regardless, women carried on with their work and were again unified in the bleak conditions. They stood together during the heartache of losing husbands, fathers, sons and brothers, and began forming football teams within the workplace to boost morale. One significant team were the Dick Kerr Ladies, a team formed in a factory in Preston. Dick Kerr & Co Limited was originally an electrical works, but during the war they were approached to aid in the manufacture of ammunition and shells. Women who worked with ammunition gained the nickname munitionettes and were drafted across the country to aid in production. The munitionettes were most at risk of toxic chemicals, and the government sent female welfare workers to these factories to oversee morale and well-being. They encouraged women to engage in sporting activities in their free time. Football became the official sport for the munitionettes, with factories all over the country forming teams and playing against different departments. It wasn't long before it developed into a means to raise money for charity. Just like when the matron of Moore Park Military Hospital approached the munitionettes to see if they would help with fundraising for injured soldiers. The arrangements were duly made, and on Christmas Day 1917 the newly formed Dick Kerr Ladies took on the neighbouring Arundel Coulthard Foundry in a charity football match. No one could have imagined the success it would turn out to be. 10,000 people came to Deepdale, the home of Preston North End, to witness the start of the most phenomenal success story in the history of women's sport. Dick Kerr ladies notched up on the first of many famous victories, and £600, which is almost 50,000 today, was raised for the wounded soldiers. The Dick Kerr ladies made history, with over 900,000 people watching and thousands of pounds being donated to charity. Their success on the pitch was also matched with an unbeatable run of 200 games. Women's football was at the top of its game, but as the war was over and the men were back home, things took a turn, and in 1921 the FA banned ladies' football. They instructed all FA-affiliated men's grounds to refuse permission for the ladies' matches, a huge blow to women all over the country. Making it hard to continue, many teams folded and women slowly were forced back into living in the men's shadows. The Dick Kerr ladies refused and continued to play where they could. In 1922 they travelled to America. Upon arriving they soon realised they were due to play the men's sides. With power and determination they succeeded in a win and won the hearts of the American people, and shortly gained the title of world champions. During the Second World War, the team were filtered back into their jobs as munitionettes and were reformed shortly after the hostilities were over. The Dick Kerr ladies continued their legacy until 1965, where they sadly disbanded due to the lack of players and the pressures of the ban. As history makers, the Dick Kerr ladies team have now gained recognition for their success, and 100 years since their formation, they received the Special Recognition Award from the FA. Only 6 years later the FA lifted the ban on women's football and the Women's Football Association was formed with 44 member clubs. The restrictions were over and it was time for women's football to be established. We fast forward to 1971. The BBC reports,
"It was short-lived, but for 3 memorable weeks in the summer of 1971, women's football flared brightly like a comet, before crashing back down to earth again."
14 months after the men were knocked out of the World Cup, football fever strikes once again, this time for England women, in their first World Cup. Harry Batt and his wife June managed this England side, many of their players coming from Chiltern Valley Ladies Football Club. The FA were trying to prevent the women from taking part, as this was an unofficial tournament and against FA rules, but the strong-willed team of 71 flew over to Mexico and were greeted with pleasurable crowds excited for the games to begin. Chris Lockwood, a former player in the 1971 team, recalls, "I don't think we knew what to expect. We had only played in the small qualifying tournament in Sicily, which was played on park-type pitches we were used to, and suddenly we were in the middle of the World Cup fever in this huge, glitzy, professionally staged global tournament. Goalposts were painted pink and officials wore bright pink kits to make the event more appealing to female and family audiences. The Italian drink Martini and Rossi were main sponsors for the tournament, with advertisements across the stadium, and the women were not receiving any money. Martini and Rossi paid all the expenses for the teams, flights, hotels and plane kits. 80,000 fans watched England versus Mexico, and a record-breaking 110,000 attended the final between Mexico and Denmark. It was a huge success. Having been treated like stars in Mexico, the team expected to return to England as sporting heroes, but that was not to be. FA handed the players bans of between 3 and 6 months for attending the unofficial tournament, and Harry Batt was banned for life for running or coaching a team. Fast forward again to 1984, with the England women's team taking part in their first European Championship. England did exceptionally well, made it through to the final against Sweden. Unfortunately, England lost on penalties, and Hope Powell, then 17, in the 1984 final, she went on to play for England until 1998, where she took on the role as manager for 15 years. The games were not televised nor reported substantially in the papers. Hope Powell said, "The recognition of us being in the final that was never spoken about. There was no media attention. You'd get in the shower when the game was done and then you'd go home, go back to work, school or college the next day." The pioneers of women's football, the team that travelled to the unofficial World Cup in Mexico in '71, were invited to Wembley to watch the current Lionesses play USA in October. After 51 years, they finally received their well-deserved recognition. Julia Brunton, a former player, explains, "It was the first time I really felt like a Lioness. We were given official caps with our England legacy number on and an England shirt with our name on. My legacy number is 13. I looked at my male equivalent and it was a chap called Leonard Howell, born in 1848, which was 103 years before I was born. We walked into the player changing rooms in Wembley and all our shirts were hanging up, like we were players now. It was incredible, so emotional." These pioneers of women's football have paved the way for the Lionesses of today. Through their hard work and determination, defying the misogynistic views and the bans placed upon them, they fought for their love of football, but mostly for their equal opportunities. Right back in the 1800s with Nettie Honeyball and her fight to prove to the world that women are not ornamental creatures, and to the Dick Kerr ladies' phenomenally successful run at becoming world champions, alongside working on the home front and aiding the country winning the war. These women are heroes in the footballing world and have made such a significant impact to women, not just in sport but in general society. They have truly made their mark. From 1998, women's football in the UK has improved slowly, but with their own professional Super League and cup tournaments taking place, female footballers are able to play professionally and full-time. Football is their career, and with training, facilities, promotional campaigns and research, opportunities for female football is on the rise. After the successful win in the European Championships this summer, women's football yet again has defied all odds and is continuing to break through the barriers. As history makers, they will be the ones to pave the way for this next generation of female footballers.
England, European champions for the very first time. History makers, record breakers, game changers. 2022.
We've been told for so many years that football's coming home. It wasn't the men that did it, it was the women.